Oh wait, before I forget this thought about what you were speaking about previously when you approached this dude, isn't it interesting that like so someone has made this comment to me before, and I think I've observed it pretty cleanly myself. A lot of the female friends that I have are attractive, like a lot of them, like they're good looking. And my argument was that like because a lot of people will see that and then assume that like oh you're only friends with them so that you can sleep with them, and it's like no, I very much you know how men can be like you know the whole friend zone idea and
Yeah,
all that bullshit.
actually, yes.
So
Yeah.
I've constantly like literally since uni because that's when I started making female friends. I've constantly had to like fight battles with dudes, and by that I just mean like literal arguments of being like, no, we are platonic friends. This is nothing. There is no sort of seeking to the future. But I do believe that there is some inkling of like approaching someone. Usually, you approach people you find aesthetically pleasing, I guess, like attractive to you. And I don't even just mean in terms of like look, like superficial look. I mean like aura. So if
Yeah.
my friends are attractive, it's because I had that initial attraction towards them. Like, you know what I mean? Like to go to them and to speak to them, whether or not it was like
Yeah.
romantic or not. Because I can freshly admit that initially when you meet someone, there's always that thought of like, oh, maybe this can be romantic. And then throughout the conversations, you're like, oh no, I'm going way further away from romantic and more closer to friend. And then eventually they just become a
Yeah.
friend. And now you have an attractive friend.
Yeah.
But then like a lot of my guy friends seem to like take that as like an inkling of suspicion of like, oh my god, a guy and a girl can't be friends. Like you can't like there's always going to be that lingering and I'm like, you're an adult, like you're a human
That's
being.
crazy. Exactly.
you
Like
can-
all your friends, like we went to boarding. Like I think it's because we went to boarding school that's an all boys boarding school. So they're like
Precisely.
your homies are your friends are all boys, men,
Yes.
boys, whatever gender. Anyway, and the opposite is who you try to get with, who you try to form a relationship with, who you try to be with, and not friends. But what I found interesting is that like I think there were quite a few like people who were both popular and also broke that. Like there were quite a few like cross-gender friends, but I actually don't know. I wasn't like I don't know if there was like shenanigans happening in that. Like there was like a friend group where people would sleep with. I don't know. But like
No, I was there. I do know, and there were quite a few who did have like female friends, and at the time it was just seen as popularity. Oh, that boy's popular because all the girls are attracted to them. Because like, and I actually this is something that's kind of key, and I wrote about this in my earlier thesis. Was that like for a lot of the boys in the school, like there was this sort of performative heterosexuality, like you needed to perform masculinity, and the way to do that was like your relation to the girls that we knew in our social circles.
Yeah.
So you never looked at women as like other people. You were like, no, you are someone I'm wanting to hook up with so that I can get social clout or whatever it might be with my friends, right? Like when you're young. So there's that direct like association with women. So like I've often told people that like I only really, and even in high school I did make like one or two female friends where it was like purely platonic, but I only really started to like genuinely see that as like a possibility when I was in uni, because I was no longer surrounded by like boys who have known nothing but other boys, and like there was a sort of testosterone filled like competition between each other, and it's like, nah, dude, you can just be friends with her. It's not that deep. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it had to be like a weird little unlearning. So I think that's kind of like where it is as well, where those guys were kind of like constantly pushing that onto you. So I think there were a few who did break the mold, but they would never sort of openly admit it, I think.
I think I also found myself having. I mean, I had female friends in high school. I mean, in prep school. And then high school, all my friends in high school were at school. So I had no female friends in high school. And then also when I got to university, like literally Baxter was because I was in Kopano at UCT, and the sister Res was, for the first 2 years at least, first 2 years of my time at UCT, not for the first 2 years being the sister Res, but was Baxter. And there were quite a few girls who I became like the two friend groups like molded, like I was like, and that's when I started, I guess, restarted being friends with girls again. Which has since pared down, but my general friends have pared down. Like number of friends have pared down since then. Which is a thing. But
I think that just happens with like aging. I feel like just like the older you get, you realize how many of your friends were friends because of proximity. Like, and it's not even like in a sort of harsh way. It's just mostly to be like, I see you every day, so we're gonna be friends. But if we stop seeing each other every day, there's no sort of immediate need or like feeling to like engage constantly. So like your numbers dwindle down like significantly, which I think also then
and also like effort
as well. Yes, like it takes Like, it takes work. Friendships take work.
But also, a lot of my friendships, at least, like, we have like, I don't say hi to my friends when I text them, because it doesn't make sense to me. Because like, what, hi, how are you? Like that, like 2 days later, we're going to talk about the actual thing that we want to talk about. Because I might message you like now, I will reply to you maybe 3 times in a row, and then I'll next reply tomorrow or something, and it's just like completely asynchronous. And
precisely,
it's just because that's how it works. Like, I don't know, like I don't have time to be texting all the time. I've got work, I've got gym, I've got podding, I've got like shared. It's like everyone's busy.
Yes.
And I quite like this form of like asynchronous communication, because like if you need something urgently, maybe you can say it's urgent or whatever. You can call like whatever, but like most of the time it's just to talk because you like conversing.
Precisely.
And you can talk about a thing when you want to talk about a thing, and then you can like dip out. And it's not like it's not like a dance, like a constant thing. Because we were always texting when we were younger, like always, constantly, always fucking.
But that's because we had time though. Right, like we had the time, like we had the capacity, and I only ever really noticed this like when I was in uni. I noticed how much time I had because when my friends obviously started graduating in third year, I stayed in uni for another 3 years. So my time stayed pretty much exactly the same as it was. Maybe it shouldn't have been, but I did decent enough work to say that it wasn't just me like, not working or whatever. So I still had a shit ton of time. I didn't have to go to lectures every day. I could dictate when my interviews were for research. I could decide on when I'm doing readings when. So my time was very much like open, but all of my friends were working. So I couldn't just like text them on a random Tuesday morning. You know what I mean? You know those memes of like that one unemployed friend on a Tuesday morning? That's like texting you and you're like, bro, I got work. Like, what are you doing? You can't do that. Like, which is kind of, I think then you only start to realize how much like, I don't know how I've managed to tie this back into capitalism and shit. But remember we had our conversation in like the first episode about how like capitalism co-opts your time, like the amount of time that you have to just do things. It's shown by like, if we just use this example of like just the capacity to text and the effort to like have friends, it was so much easier back then because we just had the space to. Whereas now it's like you're constantly working on whatever it is and you're busy and you're trying to keep up with life. You don't really have the time to make that effort for like 15 people. So you like selectively choose to make it for like maybe 4 or 5, and that's how the sort of numbers start to dip.
Yeah, that is true. But I guess we also have quite a lot more responsibilities now than when we were like fucking like your autopilot. Literally, you could like all you cared about was like studies and like like I say in high school vibes and all that, because university I guess got a bit like more serious depending on who you were. But like you go to class, you do your homework if you had, and then you do sports or whatever, and then vibes, just vibes. I mean, there was prep after at night or whatever, but like it's vibes. You don't have to worry about like I don't know, your car has got a thing, so you need to get this new car, or you need to go run get this new thing because it broke, or like this you have to go get groceries. Oh no, this Woolies is closed. They don't have the thing you want. So either like normal people probably just substitute. I'm like, okay, which Woolies has this thing I want?
Like proper life
there's
planning.
There's so much stuff we have to do now that like just didn't have to be done. So it's like yes, there's that chunk of like 8 hours plus like getting to like the before work up, like there's that chunk of like probably 10 hours like, plus like just dedicated to like around this 8-hour work day. And then there's sleep that you have to do, which is like for most people like let's say 7 hours. So we're at 17, so you have 7 more hours, which seems like a lot of time, but 7 hours dispersed throughout the day is not a lot of time. Because you have other responsibilities too. Yeah,
like your travel time to work, travel time to the gym if you go to the gym, then going to see friends if you want to do that, getting home and like just being able to clean your apartment if you need to do that. Fucking cooking a meal, like all of those things, they all just eat away at you. And then you have like an hour left of the day to just like do you. And then you're wondering why your friends aren't texting you. Like, you know what I mean? Like it's like you're all in this impossible little like bubble of like stress.
Just trying to juggle everything.
And to be fair, I never fully understood it back when I was in uni and even in postgrad. But now I have such a much deeper understanding to it where I'm more like understanding with my friends. And I'm like, hey man, text me when you need to. If you haven't texted me in a week, in a month, I don't mind. Like I know life gets...
It's fine.
Yeah, it gets too deep.
Yeah, don't feel bad. I used to feel bad, like, sorry, it's been... Now I just reply. If it's been a month, I will reply about whatever the thing was. Even if it's about... The worst is when it's like, someone tells you something, you don't... and you're messaging them about something else.
Yes.
So that I'm always like, okay, I'll tell you the thing I want, and then I reply to that thing. I'm like, oh yeah. Whatever. Oh, if it's not relevant, I'll just ignore it. So like, you wanted to know about a thing that was like 2 weeks ago. I did. But this is the thing I want to talk to you about now.
Like right now.
Yeah. Like, take your time as well. You can get back to me in 2 weeks. But
Yeah,
take your time.
which is like not that bad. But then that leads to the problem that I have, which is then I'll respond to the thing now. And then now we're having a chat about this new thing. And now I've completely forgotten the other thing was there, which is like,
Yes.
it's fine.
If it was that deep, they'd bring it up though.
Yeah, they'd
so
bring it up
wasn't
again
that
and be
deep.
like, hey, there was this thing.
Yeah.
I remember, it was probably from a TikTok or Twitter. I saw it somewhere. Because I realize now if I say I read something somewhere, especially because I'm an academic, people will assume that's like from a research paper or some shit. So I don't want to spread misinformation. This is probably from like TikTok or some shit.
Read something on the TL.
Yeah, it was somewhere on Twitter or something. But the guy was like reminding us like how much more available we've become, because if even like 20, maybe 30 years ago, 20 years ago was when 2004. Sure, we'll stick to 2004. Calling someone, you'd have to call their household. Someone in that household would have to be there, or that person would be there. And if they weren't there, you'd have to tell the person who answered to leave them a message, and then that person will get back to you. And it was like this long, and if you go further back, it's like emailing, and even further back, it's like freaking sending letters. Like
didn't
communicate this much. Like we can text our friends in the UK and be fine. You know what I mean? Like it's a whole different like ball game. And I feel like because generally our expectations of availability have increased because the like resources provided have increased, I feel like everyone's want or need for that availability from each other has become almost untenable, like to the extent that like it's unreasonable now. It's not reasonable to expect me to be there immediately, constantly. Like that's just not going to happen.
Correct. You know? No. Yeah, I was shy. But hey, listeners, what's up? You're listening to the Pink Notice podcast. You're listening to Akamanjezi and my esteemed co-host, Mukisa Mujilizi, who is speaking now.
Hi.
And what are we going to talk about today, Mukisa?
Today we've got a few interesting things. So this episode is going to be a lovely little one specifically for our South African listeners, especially if you're a South African who's voted, a South African that's interested in politics, like writ large. I think what we're going to do is try to do a series on breaking down each political party's manifesto. Now, when I say each political party, I'm not like, there's so many that we can't cover them all, and a lot of them, to be honest, aren't like statistically significant. And when they do become statistically significant, we'll cover them. But we'll stick to like the major political parties, the big players, the ANC, the DA, the EFF, MK now as well. We'll go into the FFP because holy shit, they're a nightmare. There's a few other political parties, but today I thought we should just stick to hearing about the DA and the ANC's manifesto initially, because I think there's a lot to discuss there. And if we have enough time, we'll then get into the parliamentary debate that happened, I believe now about a month ago, and just kind of see what that debate garnered, what the political parties were sort of saying to each other, what they were arguing about, and ultimately what their message for the future of South Africa being shared was. So that's what we'll go through today.
Exciting.
Yeah.
I'm keen. Listeners, this is my episode to just listen and ask questions and add insight where I have. Also,
we had a cold open already that kind of came out naturally. I already wrote down a cold open, which is a toilet rant. But we're going to save that for another.
A toilet rant about a toilet.
A rant about a toilet, listeners, but not a specific
listeners,
toilet.
I don't know if this is going to make the edit.
This is definitely going to make
about just toilets in general?
Yeah, but no. Like, actually, I'm just going to do it now. We're going to do the toilet rant. I'm going to do the toilet rant.
I am interested.
Okay, so you know how like toilets have been, no, at least, okay, let me be specific. Toilet seats have been gendered, and people like might think I'm insane for saying that. But basically,
I'm looking at you weirdly.
Most people who sit down to pee, and in that bracket, I would say the majority of women, need the toilet seat down. And most men who stand up to pee, or most people who stand up to pee, have the toilet seat up, right? Mm-hmm. So men get a lot of shit for not putting the toilet seat down. This is like a universal complaint that women in heterosexual relationships have. Like even with like siblings and shit. Like men just constantly forget to put the toilet seat down. This is like a universal thing. But my issue, and I know I sound like an insane person, but my issue is that why is it on the one gender to put the toilet seat down when in fact both parties should be playing their role in just according to the way the toilet was initially designed, the way the toilet seat was initially designed. And here's my
toilet seat law.
Yeah. Oh my God, getting into the intricacies of the design. Do you remember that big debate?
No, I wasn't alive.
on the right way to have your toilet roll pointed, right? Like It should
Yeah,
be...
it's over, not under. It is over.
Yes,
it is
it's
over.
over.
It should be over. That is the correct
See,
answer.
that's like
Cool,
the
awesome.
correct factual like thing that needs to be. But most people will still argue that it's under, but they don't know that that was the way the sort of patent was designed. Most people don't know that the toilet seat lid has a specific role, right? Like it's not just there for show. Its role is to stop the toilet water from getting into your bathroom, like sprayed all over.
Yes, that's what I was going to ask you, actually. I was like, that debate leaves out, like, why are you flushing the toilet seat with the lid up? Like, why is the lid up when you flush?
So this is specifically my thing. The only reason one should be having an argument about the toilet seat being up or down, and by that I mean specifically the middle seat, not the lid.
Yes, yeah.
Is if you're not closing your lid constantly, which is what you're supposed to be doing. Because if you flush the toilet while the lid is open, you are essentially allowing water particles from inside the toilet to fly up to 6 meters into your bathroom. That's including toothbrushes that aren't covered,
on your toothbrush,
on your soap, on your shampoos, on your like everything that you use, and
in your mouth, maybe,
in your mouth
if it's open.
Yeah, exactly. What happens if you've just showered and you're just like, oh wait, let me quickly flush the toilet because I peed earlier. Now you haven't closed the lid, and now you're dirty all over again.
Yeah.
So this is where my rant. Now, like, the logic of it comes into play. If the lid and the toilet seat are both down at the same time, it means then that both parties entering the bathroom have a decision to make. Am I lifting just the toilet lid so that I can sit down to do whatever it is that I need to do? Or am I lifting both the lid and the seat to stand up and do what it is that I need to do? Do you get me? So that's my toilet rant.
Yeah.
I'm definitely for women's rights and women's wrongs. I'm like, I will stand up and be like, okay, I understand that this is like one minutia where men can stand up and make women's lives easier. Like I'm all for that, and I completely get it. And like if I'm in a relationship, I'm gonna understand the argument in that case. But in this instance, it is so clear to me that like the right answer is just that like the lid should be down, and therefore both of us are doing the lifting. In any case, then there shouldn't be any arguments at all. Do you get me? So that's my toilet rant. No. I was like, I just need to get that out.
Why? How did you you see, I rant about the weirdest things. And, there's normally an event, that like causes me to rant about the way that Checkers' queues are different to Woolies, which is the most optimum way. You need one queue.
Yeah.
So like, what brought you? Like, who told you to put your toilet seat? Like, where was this? Were you watching something? Were you
constantly every single
you're a
time
psychopath.
I go to use the bathroom, I think about it, and it's not even on purpose. It's just every time I go to lift the toilet seat, I'm just like, hey, this isn't that big of a deal. Why is it such a big deal? And actually, I remember...
Is it a big deal, Mukisa? Or was it just a big deal?
Oh, no, it's a big deal. And I'll personalize this and why it was a big deal to me in particular. So I was dating someone, and she
This
shared
is two. You're on two now.
Yeah, this is... Mentioning exes, that's fine.
I will not mention one. This is your episode. You're the only mention this episode.
I dated someone, and she was sharing an apartment with her sister, and it was a shared bathroom situation. And I remember that I kept forgetting to put the toilet seat down. So this was entirely my bad. And also, even back then, I knew the toilet lid needs to be down, but humans and their behaviors, you just
don't do the thing you should do.
You don't do the thing you should do.
Yeah.
And it actually became a little bit of an issue to where I started feeling really bad, because I was like, I just forgot. I didn't do this on purpose. I'm so sorry the toilet seat was down. And especially because obviously me being the only man in the house whenever I'd come visit, there was no other person to blame. It was this person is coming to disrupt our flow. Exactly. So in this scenario, I'm entering their house, so I need to follow their logic and their rules. I understood that.
Yeah.
But still, some part of me just constantly forgot about it. And then this was a year or something after we split up. I remember seeing something somewhere about the toilet lid needing to be down. And obviously, this is something that everybody understands the purpose of the toilet lid. But I think that idea that these germs are being spread everywhere is something that people just kind of look past. It's just not something people think about constantly, like I do now. And so since then,
live very sheltered lives.
Exactly. So since then, I was like, I respect that this is your house and I understand your rules. But in this scenario, we are both in the wrong here. In this particular situation.
How are you telling me I'm in the wrong in my own house?
Exactly. Exactly. So I didn't. And this is a year later. You know when you're when you're showering and you're replaying arguments in your head, and you're going back and you're like, I should have said this. What the fuck?
Yes.
This is one of those.
Wow.
This is one of those things for me. So that's how I got onto the toilet rant. Okay, so what I wanted to start with, just for the listeners, to give them a quick debrief on the history of the ANC and the DA. And actually, before we get into that, I do just want to say that these histories are not going to be comprehensive. They're not going to be like a deep dive into, all the intricacies of what these political parties have done. And maybe we one day do an episode on that, because I think the history of the ANC in particular is so intricate and tied to the history of South Africa itself and the fabrics of democracy and liberation movements and so on and so forth, that it warrants an episode on its own. So the history that I'm going to go through today is more brief and just like a very quick summary of these political parties, just to give you an idea on who they are, what they are, especially if this is your first real foray into South African politics. Not everybody listening is South African. But before we get into that, we'll start with the ANC. Aka, no pressure on to you, but actually let's do a general overview. What's your opinion? What's your understanding of the ANC and the DA? Just so that everybody can...
Oh, my understand. Is it like modern South Africa?
Yeah.
ANC DA vibe?
Yeah.
Oh, is that I guess since 94, 90, when was the first election? 94? Was that 96? Yeah. So since 96, I guess, yeah. So the ANC has been the majority. I think the majority has been dwindling since, or not dwindling, but been reducing since, but they have been the dominant political party in South Africa. And I guess over time, the DA has come up as their best their strongest opposition. And ideologically, I think the DA is more let's do a race blind approach to moving forward to South Africa, whereas the ANC is more well, race caused the problem, you kind of need to fix the problem with race sometimes, in that sense. But I think I don't know about economically, but I think they both seem kind of I don't know, the DA does seem more neoliberally to me than the ANC, but yeah, I don't know, I guess that's a brief understanding. I've never voted for either of those two parties, so
I was going to say, are we divulging our voting our voting secrets?
Look, I voted for Good Party the first time I voted, purely because that I think I saw on there. I decided in the morning, I was I hosted, yes, I know, but I sat down on the toilet that morning and I was let me look at all these. I had to vote that day, so it's okay, let me look at some manifestos, and then I looked at a few, and then they said something about public transportation. I was oh, that's sick, I like that.
Yeah. So
then I was cool, I'll vote for you.
Yeah.
Because I mean, I knew I didn't want to vote for either of the two, and they were a tiny party, so I was well, why not? So I did divulge that vote,
which is completely fair. You were a single issue voter in that case. Then, you were this is the one thing that I care about right now.
Yeah, public transport is sick. I mean, this is the only thing worth caring about now. I'm interested in that. So yeah, because I didn't have wheels back then. I was an Uber warrior.
A professional pedestrian, as our wonderful friend Amani always
yes.
This is hilarious. When he got his driver's license, he's I'm no longer a professional pedestrian. I was you idiot.
Did he get a car with his license? Because I've had my driver's license since grade 8.
Jesus.
Since matric. And I only literally got a car a few months ago. So
okay, fair,
I was a professional pedestrian with a license. I literally got my driver's license renewed without having owned a car.
Okay, so I think that's actually an interesting distillation for most. I do genuinely believe that most people, I guess, within our sort of position socially as well, I think they tend to see it that way. And by that way, I mean that the ANC and the DA are in a constant battle. And if I don't want to vote for the ANC, I'm going to vote for the DA. And if I don't want to vote for the DA, it might be sort of political, familial reasons. I mean, most people vote on I think there were 3 major reasons, which is family, just history. What is your family voted on? Does it affect you individually, personally, what the elections are about? And then the last thing is just basically just to do your sort of civic duty as an individual who's sort of has a role to play in society. So I think what we've noticed maybe historically in South Africa is that a lot of white people have voted for the DA, and that's generally been the voting bloc. It's that, and then obviously the majority of black people, just according to the sheer number and statistics, have been voting for the ANC. And whether you think that's good or bad or whatever, that's neither here nor there. That's just what we've kind of seen the sort of history of elections in South Africa, at least post 1994, has played out. So we'll go actually briefly into the ANC. So the ANC was formed in 1912, which is actually kind of surprising to a lot of people because 1912 is really early on. But at this time, the country was still somewhat ruled by the British. But I say somewhat because obviously the South African War, otherwise known as the Anglo-Boer War, was fought in 1899 to around 1901. And it was around this period where the Dutch were essentially getting more and more power, and the British settlers themselves were also essentially sort of setting their foot in their ground in South Africa politically, while the empire itself, the British colony itself, was actually removing itself from this process. So the Dutch and the British settlers were like, hey, how about we do this joint thing where we create a government? And they were like, cool, let's do that. And then the black people were like, hey, how about the majority of the people in this country? Do we get a say in this government? And they were like, no, you don't, actually, not at all.
You're not Christian.
Yeah, not even slightly. You're not there. We're not going to do it. So the ANC formed really as a way for the African nations. And when I say African nations, I mean specifically the chiefdoms in the country. They recognized that they didn't have any sort of physical power. A lot of wars and stuff that they had fought before then, obviously some successfully, but a lot of others deeply unsuccessfully. So they were losing the physical battle. And so they were like, politically, the smartest option might be to play their game and to start a political party where we're joined as one and we come together. So this was actually seen as the only real way for their rights to sort of be gained after all of this commotion, especially since the Dutch and the British settlers were like, no, you can't actually have any political part in this. So the ANC was really an important push at gaining some semblance of recognition for black people and like as human beings and like getting like human rights. And so this was really important for them at this stage. And from this point forward, like the true systematic structures of apartheid were really beginning to form. And by this, I mean the Land Act of, I believe, 1913, where black people were restricted to buying land, selling land, owning land outside of the specific reserves that were demarcated. For a lot of people, I think tend to forget. And by the way, whenever I say for a lot of people, I actually mean specifically me when I was a kid learning about these things. I'm using myself as a representative.
Yeah, but you're not unique though. So like,
fair, yeah.
I think,
I'm sure there might be a bunch of people who maybe were thinking the same as me. But for a lot of people, like there might be an assumption that apartheid started in the 1940s, which is just not true. It started much earlier than that. Like these laws and segregations were built into law like officially declaring it like an official system of apartheid. So that's when it started. And so because of like the ANC's like genuinely like impressive and admirable fight in the 1900s, of course, it led to the end of apartheid, which I know is kind of crazy for me to jump from like 1913 all the way through apartheid to the first South African elections. But as I said, if we sat here and like went through everything that they did, we like this would be we would be here for a very long time. Just know that there was a lot of important shit, and there's going to be an episode covering that important shit in the gap there. And so, of course, we get to the late 1900s, in the 1990s, where South Africa has its first democratic elections. And of course, Nelson Mandela was elected as president of the ANC first initially, and then the ANC was voted in as the ruling party with I think they said they had a majority of about 62-point-something% at the time, which is huge. It's a landslide. Like in most countries, if you're getting above 50%, it's pretty impressive of the majority. But it's important to note that the website said something particularly interesting, the ANC website, when I was going through their history, which is right like the last sentence of their history page, which was, and I quote, "And the ANC has been in power since." This was after mentioning Nelson Mandela's historic victory, which I found ironic because I think that's an incredibly to them, that's an incredibly powerful statement of like, we've held power and, you know, we're this big important party, but that also implicates you in everything that has happened.
That's an indictment.
Since. Yeah, that's you stating that everything wrong that has happened since, everything that has been a fuck up, everything that has been good as well, that's on you, which I found was like, I was like, yeah, that's an interesting tagline to end your webpage on, because I'm like, I don't think that's I think your social media team needs to go back to that and like rethink that final sentence, because it doesn't help you. At least now it's not as helpful. So we'll switch over to the DA, whose history is much shorter than the ANC's, because if we're speaking technically, the DA was only formed in 2000, but historically there is sort of amalgamation of a bunch of liberal parties throughout South African history. At least they claim the liberal parties.
You see, I have a question here. There's something that like I have heard being complained about, which is that, I mean, that the DA is basically is the old National Party, and I have no idea what merit there is to that statement at all. I've heard obviously DA supporters are like, they're completely different, or whatever, and I'm just like, well, I don't know. Maybe some people got grandfathered in. I don't know. what truth is there to that like opinion, or to that like where does the truth lie?
Yeah, so I had the exact same question, and I was actually surprised reading up. I mean, okay, not surprised, because there's no ways they're going to put on their own website that, hey, we had members that were in the National Party. But the side of the history that they kind of put forward is, let me actually just go through it, and then we'll maybe answer that question a little bit closer to the end. But they, according to them, and I again, I'm going to be very, like, according to them specifically, this isn't according to any independent journal. This is straight from their website. They did oppose apartheid in 1961, which is actually true. I can't remember the lady's name, but this, at the time, it was known as the Progressive Party, and they were the one individual party that was actually opposing a lot of the policies that the Apartheid National Party was putting in place into Parliament. And around 1989, when apartheid was really starting to like properly crumble and things were starting to look up for Black South Africans into the 1990s, they had a hand in constructing the new constitution. And at this point, they were still known as the Democratic Party. So between 1989 to about 1999...
Progressive Party?
No, the Democratic Party. So they've switched from Progressive Party, and then they brought in a few other parties. They coalesced, and then they were known as the Democratic Party between 1989 to around 2000. And then from 2000 onwards, they've been known as the Democratic Alliance, the party that we now know as the official opposition party to the
Mr.
ANC.
Steenhuisen.
Yeah, Mr. Steenhuisen and the boys.
Steenhuisen.
So the reason why I said maybe we should leave that question that you had up until this point is because, again, they're not going to disclose that they have members of the National Party in there. I think that's on independent media, and maybe it's on our part to do that as well. But I do think it's interesting because they specifically position themselves as the opposition party, right? Like we are the opposition to the African National Congress, which I think is interesting for two reasons. Because, well, A, you were initially opposing the apartheid government, and now you're opposing the Liberation Party that stopped apartheid. So what does that implicate you? What does that mean exactly? Like, what does it mean to be the opposition party to the Liberatory Party? Like, especially at that time. Now I think it's okay to be like, we're the opposition party because the ANC is no longer what it used to be. But initially, though, what specifically, what does that mean exactly? And so on their website, they argue that their role is to, quote, foster democracy and ensure that the monopoly of the ANC's political party or popularity does face some opposition, which I think is like in most cases, and this is why I say again, like contemporary South Africa, that makes perfect sense. Democracy requires multiple parties. It requires a system where people actually do have a genuine ability to vote for different parties that stand for different things. But initially though, like what is that you were opposing? You know what I mean? Like the liberation of
you just want
South
to see it?
Exactly, which you initially claimed to oppose against the National Party. What was that thing that you were in opposition to? And I think this brings us to a very interesting part, and I labeled this as like very interesting framing, because why make that decision? And I think it's interesting for a couple of reasons. So the first one is quite important. I said I think it highlights white South Africa's reluctance to phase into this new South Africa, because I think there is this misconception that, like, you know, when Nelson Mandela was elected, actually before, when we actually had the sort of democratic elections, apartheid obviously was crumbling. A lot of the laws and legislations were being overturned and changed. People thought that like white people were like, oh cool, we're not allowed to be racist anymore. Perfect, wonderful, this is grand. We'll just be on our merry on way, you know what I mean? Like, but 1994 is not that far away. I mean, my sister, who's 30 now, born in 1994, like it's not that far away. You know what I mean? Like it's really not that. And a lot of our parents and a lot of grandparents lived through the thick of apartheid, like they were in it. You know what I mean? And so
I think all of our parents, if you're like at least like 98, like no 3-year-olds having a kid.
Yeah. If you were born in the 90s, your parents likely grew up under an apartheid system. And so what that means is then you, like this, I think, immediate expectation that white South Africans were like, oh cool, yeah, no, we'll just transition, that's okay. That's just not true. A story I often give is something that I heard from an activist, this was a couple years ago, and they were mentioning just how in order to get their farm in the early 90s, they had to get permission from all the farmers around in the surrounding farms who were white because he was a colored man. And there were like 3 or 4 of them that were just like vehemently against this. Like they absolutely opposed this. Fast forward to 4 years later, he managed to get the farm. But fast forward to 4 years later, apartheid ends. Suddenly he's now living in and amongst people who he knows are visceral racists. Like that doesn't change just because the law is suddenly like, oh yeah, it's no longer okay to be this way. You know what I mean? Which is like a very important thing. And so I said that like the white South Africans needed a party to vote for that wasn't the National Party and also wasn't the ANC. Because they weren't going to vote for the ANC because to a lot of white South Africans, the ANC were going to strip away many, if not all, of the sort of privileges that they had under the National Party. Whether or not they wanted to admit that like they enjoyed these privileges will, it's up for discussion.
The people are always like, that's like not in my, like you can do progressivism, but it's just as long as it doesn't affect me. Like as long as I get to keep my nice things and like my really good public school, like my really good XYZ, like people can have other things, but I need to have mine.
No, 100%. And it's like,
quote unquote mine.
Yeah, specifically me. Like, no, I completely agree with what you're doing. Just don't touch my stuff. Like, don't. Yeah. Which I think is why I often say, or at least I've been saying in this episode, that like it's interesting to position yourself as the opposition to the ANC at this point, because it's a very deliberate tactic. It's knowing that there will be many white South Africans who are still deeply conservative or still deeply racist, who don't want to appear to be, because there's something that I think most human beings don't want, which is to be perceived as like morally corrupt or, nobody likes to be called a racist. Nobody likes to be labeled as something bigoted. That's generally speaking. There are people who actually take that label, but generally they don't like that. And so I think the DA kind of served that for them, right? It was like a moment to be like, okay, well, the DA is not necessarily opposing the end of apartheid, but they're suggesting that we need to mitigate how far this end goes. Like how far left are we talking here? How much liberation are we really talking here? Which I think is very interesting.
Oh, that is quite interesting.
Because they had to position themselves that way, because I also think from the DA's perspective, they knew we're not going to win any black votes, not in this election. That's just not going to happen. There's also going to be a large majority of white people. Let me not say the majority of white people, but a large number of white people who are going to not want to vote for the ANC, but not want to look racist. That means there's a very big voter pool that doesn't actually know where they're going to vote for. So I think them positioning themselves as the opposition was a good way for them to be like, hey, you people, come with us, like you don't have to vote for the ANC. And so the second reason I think this is interesting is because, so the Democrats in the US, they often argue that it's important to have a strong Republican Party.
Which makes no sense to me.
It doesn't make any sense.
I want to get my shit done. I want a weak opposition, the weakest opposition possible, so that I can execute my political vision. Like I don't understand, if I truly am oppositional to their beliefs, why do I, why? Just so that I can be fair or whatever. I think their values are wrong. Like I disagree with their values. So why do I want them to also be strong?
Yeah.
I don't get that.
Because, no, completely. And that's exactly what I was going to say. And just to add to that as well, is that if you're so okay with an opposition party winning and or stopping you from winning, it means that you don't actually hold the values of the party that you represent. Yeah. You're just kind of there to show this idea of, and this is why the two-party system
play the game.
Two-party system is essentially just there to ensure that things remain relatively the same. So in South Africa's case, then, to mount opposition to the ANC at this point, at least, I argue is that it might be to ensure liberation is kept on a leash, like I said earlier. It's like we know that the ANC, exactly, the ANC was a communist party originally. They were very open about that. They were very happy about that. Yeah, that was entirely their thing. And so leftism was very much on the cards for the country. So in my opinion, I think essentially this opposition was there to ensure that this communist party doesn't change South Africa into some sort of communist, at least in my opinion, utopia, but in their opinion, hellhole. So we'll see. So it was almost a way to kind of just resist that, to pull, literally to pull the ANC back from oh yeah, we know you've won these elections that we've given to you, but we need to sort of pull you back away from taking everything away from us.
What share of the vote did they have?
Initially, I'm not entirely sure. But of the 62% that the ANC won, I don't know what the breakdown is after that.
Maybe the ANC won 60%?
62%, yeah.
Oh, that's not even that much. That is a majority.
It's a huge majority, though. I mean, this is what I was saying earlier, which is that most political parties go above 55% even when they win elections. I mean, the Democratic Party in the US win on like fucking 50.1% or 49.8% or some shit. Like it's kind of nuts. And I was also surprised by the 62% number until you factor in there obviously were other black parties that obviously, you know, started their own parties, and that initially there were a few parties that wanted secession from South Africa as a state, considering the history of it. There were, you know, so I don't know what the DA's breakdown was, but that's why I'm just assuming that a large majority of the white vote was essentially going to them initially to just pull the ANC and rein them in again.
Because I think it's also quite naive, I think, to think that once it became bad to do apartheid, everyone who benefited from apartheid was like, okay, we're all friends now.
Exactly.
Like, do you know people? Like, sure, people can change their beliefs, but they don't happen overnight.
Precisely.
I mean, they might, maybe like do acid or whatever, take ketamine.
All those people who were like initially, they were like liberally opposed. Socially, they were opposed to it, but fiscally, they were like, yeah, it's fine. It might have been easier to convince them to be like, okay, no, I get why we need to sort of push against this. But no, there were many people who were like, this is fucked socially and fiscally, and I don't want anything to change, but I don't want that to be publicly known. And God, man, white South Africa got away with so much. I know this is like, maybe I shouldn't say that, but they got away with, it does, man.
Yeah.
They got away with so much. I remember a couple of years ago, I wanted to do a story and write a whole piece on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, because there was something so, I guess I understand, there was something so sort of human and beautiful about forgiveness in that moment, but the stories that I read, the stories that I heard were so visceral and horrendous, and like truly like when they describe, obviously I'm an atheist, I don't believe in hell, but the shit that the people described that they did, I was like, that's what I would imagine hell would be like. You know what I mean? Like that's what I'm assuming they do in hell. And these people are just like, oh yeah, no, I've been forgiven now, so I guess my family and the farm that we've illegally acquired, or at least under apartheid legally acquired, are going to live a pretty...
Like driving from... So I drove down from Cape Town to Johannesburg like last Saturday, like almost 2 weeks ago now. Not last Saturday then. but the Saturday before last. That doesn't actually matter. So I'm driving, and like on the left, you know, there's these like farms probably owned by like tiny people own these farms, like tiny proportion. And then on the other side, there are these like shacks, these dwellings that are like, sometimes it's a bunch of shacks, sometimes it's a lot of dense housing. Yeah. And it's just like, land needs to be redistributed.
Yeah.
Like I don't understand like why it doesn't, like just so that like there could be more grapes, just that we can be like, sure, these are all important things. Yes, it does matter. But like, maybe if you're saying, sure, we can't actually stop farming the grapes, then like, why don't you split up that equity then? There's 100%. Equity on that land, say that like X% of the shareholding goes to these random people. They can benefit from owning that land, but not take away from the land actually being a productive source instead of it. Anyway, but no, this is like the stark, like big open land owned by small groups of people, and then big open land filled by like tons of people. Not even big open land, not even. Just like land full with like stacks and stacks of people. And it's just like, how is this right? Like, how is this? How do you see that and be like, there does not need to be some sort of land redistribution happening? Like, I don't understand.
Precisely. And it's good that you brought that up, because we will get into that specifically in the parliamentary debate conversation. But this is why people are now pointing to the GNU being particularly confusing, because the ANC are actually for changing the constitution, and we'll get to like the specifics of that, but changing the constitution was specifically with regards to land rights and ownership and distribution and so on. But the DA are like vehemently opposed to this, whereas the EFF and MK are also for changing the constitution for land rights. So how does the coalition government between the ANC and the DA make sense in this case? And how would the ANC essentially change the constitution when within their own political coalition, one group is saying no, and three groups are actually saying yes to this change? You know what I mean? Like the GNU, it's going to be so fun getting into it, because there's so many contradictions here that between the ANC and the DA, and that's actually why I wanted to specifically focus on them today, because there are a few things that just doesn't add up as to how they sort of coalescing together. But sorry, okay, let's get back to this. So I wanted to point out that like opposition, and I want to be fair here, some might argue that maybe it's too fair, but I want to be fair to the DA and say that like opposition, calling yourself the opposition party doesn't necessarily mean you oppose everything that they stand for. And this is why I say our Overton window, and I'll give a definition for that because I've mentioned it quite a few times, is much further to the left than most Western countries, at least in the Americas, specifically North America, because the DA didn't oppose the end of apartheid. They didn't oppose giving black people rights. They didn't oppose, like the generally like liberally good stuff. But they were the opposition when it came to the fiscal stuff. Again, land redistribution.
The stuff that mattered.
The stuff that mattered.
They both
Precisely.
mattered. Both stuff mattered. But this is like the stuff that actually has an impact. Being able to live on land, being able to go to schools that are well funded, live on communities that are well looked after, well resourced, continue.
Yeah, no, precisely. And this is why I actually said here, I argue that like it's arguably more important, the fiscal stuff, the sort of economic and land and like education and those things are like
very important.
Yeah, those are very important. And I use the quote here, and I can't remember who said this, and I do apologize, but it was a very good American liberator. It might have been Kwame Ture. I can't remember, but he says, I don't fear the man who calls me the N-word. That's his problem. I fear the man who has the power to do something about that hate. Then that becomes my problem. And that's where I go, the DA, and I don't want to give them too much credit here, but there was a calculation made there that like socially we can cede ground here. We can absolutely say, yeah, socially this is just objectively bad. We shouldn't be treating black people this way. Understood. But when it comes to actual like material systematic power, they were not willing to cede that much ground actually. And that's why South Africa is called more of a liberal democracy, and the ANC have the label of like democratic socialists or socially democratic, which is just a way for them to say that they're on the left, but they're still very much neoliberal. Like they're still trying to do these policies that are beneficial to the top 1% and not beneficial to like 90% of the rest of the country. And so that's why I think it's like going into the DA and its history is important to note here as this idea of the opposition party, because again the question is, what are you specifically opposing?
It's like also the whole like socially liberal but fiscally conservative is like how you need fiscals to continue with the social liberation, like the fiscus is needed as well. So like what happens when those two things butt heads? Do you then clutch your purse, or do you then say, no, I agree that this is going to benefit the larger social goal that we claim to uphold, so we're going to then go for it? I mean, yeah. So
that's like one of the sort of important things where I was like, I feel like, and this is where I say often, and I remember my supervisor sort of being very specific with me, saying that I often do jump to giving too much credit to people and the decisions that they make. But I honestly think it's not that I'm giving them too much credit. It's just that I feel like if we don't credit them for doing this in a deliberate way, then you're going to fall for it again. Like you're going to fall for the good white liberal who's saying that they're doing this because they mean it in their hearts of hearts to be a nice person, and yet everything that they're actually acting out is not a nice thing. And in this case, I like look at the DA and I go, yeah, I will happily, if I was in the DA, I would say, yeah, I would happily say that black people deserve rights. I will happily, move to the left socially on those things. But when I'm speaking to my constituencies and when I'm speaking to my people, I'm going to remind them constantly that like none of that actually matters. Your money is going to stay the same. Your ownership of the land is going to stay the same. And you're still going to be the majority shareholders of the country. Like you're still going to be the large benefactors of the country, even if that's a shifting landscape. And that's what becomes very scary about neoliberalism. That's what kind of makes, I guess, these sort of policies that I think a lot of white South Africans, and even white South Africans in our age group, are often, they're missing the forest for the trees. They're looking at this thing and being like, the DA is the opposition to the ANC is corrupt, therefore I should vote for the DA. When it's like, no, but actually what you should be doing is being a little bit more critical in terms of who you want to vote for and understand what it is that you're voting for. So don't vote against the ANC. Vote for that political party that you're wanting to vote for, And I think that's where the important conversation needs to be had. Of course, this is coming from a non-South African.
Yeah, but you vote. When last did you vote?
I don't vote in South Africa.
No, in Tanzania?
Yes, of course. Yeah. No, but our elections run every 5 years. And I missed the initial one because I was still at uni. But the next one is, the regional ones are this year and then the national ones are next year. So I will be voting. I am a voter. Yeah. So I still see the importance in electoral politics. politics. So yeah, do you have any thoughts so far? That's just a summary of like the DA and the ANC and their history and kind of where they're at. Did anything surprise you, or are you more like, yeah, that's generally what I expected?
That is mostly generally what I expected. I think the most poignant thing, I think, is that contradiction of like being fiscally conservative but socially liberal, I think is one that like people think is a fine thing to have. Like I think it's like it makes sense to be like, yeah, I want to reduce my tax burden, but I also think that like there should be good public transport. So it's like, okay, but how does that happen?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I don't know. Like, so like I think, I don't know, it helps elucidate like the flaws in liberalism, I guess, and the power of like that. There's more than just social issues that are necessary, I guess. Just in that brief overview. And I think, I
think for me, like one of the things about going into this is that like one of the things that's always pissed me off about white South Africa, and having gone to the schools that we went to and the social circles that we encompass, we encounter white South Africa all the time. And I don't even mean like the old white South Africa. I'm talking about the fucking 20-year-olds white South Africa. One of the things that pisses me off is that like there's this idea that they can divorce being a good person to voting for good policy. Like in their heads, they're like literally what you just said. It's like, I don't want taxes to be increased. I don't want my money to be taken away because of corruption, etc. and so on. But I also hate seeing people living in the townships, and I feel so sad that like, you know, South Africa is this way, and it hurts my heart that like this thing exists as that. And it's like, but then are you for land redistribution? Are you for them changing the constitution in order to give black people their land back? And then suddenly you're like, whoa, but why are you taking away someone's hard-earned money? Why are you taking away someone's you know what I mean? Like that's where and I see it so often. It's this sort of liberal, why can't we all just love each other? And I go, but we can't all just love each other because some of you have 70% of the
we're not
cake.
all equal.
Yeah. So it's like,
and it's still being eaten.
Precisely, and the cake is still being eaten. So as much as I very much am for like loving each other and being like, yeah, we're all human beings and we need to care for that. This is the sort of biggest glaring issue that I have with the DA. And I want to be critical of the ANC here too. The issue that I have with the ANC is that I don't necessarily disagree with a lot of their policies. It's just that they've been really shitty at enacting them. They've just done a really bad job at that. So that's why I don't like the ANC.
A bad job.
Yeah, exactly. Like we want to be clear on our podcast. Like it's not like we're ANC voters. It's just that they've failed to deliver on a lot of what they promised that they would deliver. But the issue there isn't the fact that isn't their policies. It's just their delivery of those policies. The issue that I have with the DA is that they're actively wanting those policies to continue because it actually benefits rich and white South Africa. Their conservatism is it's fundamentally to maintain the system as is. And they're using corruption and, you know, sort of opposing the ANC and whatnot as like this blanket sort of liberal politic of like, they're not doing the right thing. We're here to do the right thing. We're here to govern properly. And it's like, but their definition of governance is something you need to understand, because what they're trying to tell you is that you can absolutely have less taxes and good roads. Like they're trying to sort of, you know what I mean? Like they're trying to tell you that this thing exists when it doesn't. And that's where the sort of nefariousness of the DA comes in. And that's where I like wish my white South African friends would sort of know like more about, like feel a bit more conviction about, to be like, hang on, what is it actually that I'm voting for, you know?
Yeah, no, that's power. Yeah.
Precisely, that's exactly what it is. So before we move on, I just wanted to mention two effects so far. The ratchet effect and the Overton window.
Oh, so I understand the Overton window is like what people understand as like the acceptable political beliefs to have. Like like in apartheid, for example, like giving black people rights was out in like, I guess, white South Africa was beyond the Overton window. That's the term to use. And I think the ratchet effect is when like, it's kind of like like something you go like from super far left to far right horseshoe. Is it similar or distinct from horseshoe theory?
It's very similar.
Okay.
In that one party uses everything within their abilities to shift literally the political understanding. So basically the Overton window towards their side, while the other party does everything to stop people on the other side of that from pulling it back. So for instance, the example that I love to use is the Republicans versus the Democrats. Republicans will overturn Roe versus Wade. The Democrats will go, okay, but we can't do anything about that, but you need to vote for us because we'll try to push back. Then the Republicans get more emboldened and they're like, okay, well, now that we've overturned Roe v. Wade, what can we do? We're going to pack the courts. The left will be like, hey, Democrats, hi, they're packing the courts. You need to either increase the amount of nominees that your president can have or do something about the court system that they're packing. And the Democrats will go, no, because that's a slippery slope. What, like, if we have that power, then the Republicans will have.
You're playing different games. You guys are playing different games.
Exactly. These are two very different, like, games that they're playing. The Republicans will do something. The Democrats will show you why it's a bad idea to stop them from doing that thing. And so constantly shifting towards the right without even like a proper recognition of it. And it's why the left is so sort of angry towards the Democrats, because it's mostly like, if you can't see it, then you're incompetent. And if you do see it, then you're nefarious, because it means you actually do support the Republican policies. You just want to pretend like you don't. And so that's ultimately what we're working with here today, with the ratchet effect and the Overton window. Those are two things that we might bring up throughout these episodes, like just as normal conversations. I've already brought up the Overton window quite a few times. Let me just give you guys the definition of it. So the Overton window is a model for understanding how ideas in society change over time and influence politics. So the core concept is that politicians are limited to what policy ideas they can support publicly. So they generally only pursue policies that are widely accepted through society as legitimate policy options. So and those policy options lie inside the Overton window. So like you said, if you were in apartheid South Africa and you were a member of the National Party or another party that was pro-apartheid, and you suddenly went, hey, how about we allow black people to, I don't know, sit at the beach, the same beach as white people. That's not within the Overton window. You're not going to get elected. Yeah. In fact, you're going to get booted out of there. In fact, supporting those policies is within the Overton window. Whereas today, if you said that shit, you would, honestly, like, your political career would likely be over. Although that's arguable. Yes. I mean, Helen Ziller says some raucous shit, and she's still a part of the part of the DA. So that's essentially what it means and what it looks like. So we'll mention that over time, because I think that's a very important thing to understand, especially with regards to political parties, because political parties will constantly try to mention policies in public. They'll try to sort of drip feed it to you to just kind of see what the climate is like. And then once they figure out that, like, actually people are for this, then they'll suddenly start talking about it like it's, you know, a sort of national thing, because they realize that they won't actually lose any votes on it. Yeah. But yeah, so that's that. That's the full spiel. And just for the listeners, we will not be getting into the parliamentary debate today. We can get into that another time.
In at least like 3 or 4 weeks.
Yeah, we need to give this time to like sit so that we can actually do other episodes and other like projects and many things. But I'm actually, it might be kind of cool to do this as like a series where, you know, next time, and by next time I mean next time we want to do this series and not next episode, where we go over the EFF and MK's policies, go over some of the others as well, just to kind of give you guys a deep breakdown on their politics, and so that you guys can return to this if you ever need to, and just kind of get a deeper understanding of South African politics. But for now, that was just a brief insight into the ANC and the DA. We went through their history and how they came about. So if you found that interesting, please do let us know. Hopefully you did. Otherwise, if you didn't, then that's that, I guess.
Come find us. You can don't come find us. It is probably easier to find me than to find you. You can probably figure out where I spend my time if you really wanted to. But do not come find us. Just use the comment box. Use your fingers to fight us. Type in the Substack comment box. Just be like, oh, you guys were so awful. Do da 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 da. You know, do that one. Prefer that one. That's a good. It'll make me feel really good about myself if you do that. I promise you. I promise.
Especially if it's like something that you like disagree with us on. Like if you genuinely think some of the things we red flagged and whatever are, you know, questionable, or you might disagree with it and whatever, then that's perfectly fine. It's okay to be ideologically like not aligned with us. Like that's perfectly okay. But as we've highlighted, like we're leftists, so the majority of our positions are going to come from that positionality, that ideology, and we're trying to give you an insight into why we see this the way that it is seen. And if you see it differently, then you should absolutely let us know, and we can have a conversation with you in the comments section. Don't be mean, we're fragile, but it'll be nice to
and don't be scared. I mean, like, who are we, you know? We decided to speak. Yeah. Decided to put our opinions, or however malformed they may be. I mean, some of them are quite well formed. I say so ourselves. But, but yeah, feel free. It's open comment box.